and indeed the spectacular failure of U.S.-China relations after the war showed in part how thin our alliance with China was, and how few interests and values were in fact shared between the two nations once the defeat of Japan was assured. This became very clear after VJ Day. President Roosevelt's desire to treat China as a great power was one reason why the United States relinquished its extraterritorial rights in China in 1943. But the policies by which the Chinese government expected to attain great power status turned out to be in some opposition to American interests. China's post-war plans called for a state-led military-industrial development of an increasingly socialized economy, in which foreign and Chinese capital, as Sun Yat-sen had imagined, would be channeled to the needs of the Chinese state. The difficult negotiations for a commercial treaty to succeed the old so-called unequal treaty system, negotiations that make today's commercial problems with China seem rather minor, revealed the size of the gap between Chinese and American interests. Even before the complications of the Chinese Civil War, which started in earnest in 1946, it was clear enough that the prospects for post-war Chinese-American cooperation were not all that great. After the war, with the issue of extraterritoriality gone, and with a Chinese government in a position to enforce its authority on the internal frontiers of Chinese foreign relations, Chinese laws began to govern and to restrict the activities of Americans in China, as they still do to this day. When one thinks about it, perhaps what has been most special about Chinese-American relations, compared with those of Great Britain in the 19th century or Russia in the 20th century, was that until World War II, these relations had been of secondary importance to both nations. And even then, they would not remain at the center for either side. And this is something that comes as a bit of a shock to Americans, who like to think of themselves as being at the center of the world, and to Chinese, who know they are. And it's a disappointment to the small cottage industry in both countries that studies the history of Chinese-American relations. But it seems to be true. And the patterns of the 1940s, in which a Chinese government would show its determination to resist American advice, pressure, and even support in order to pursue its own objectives, would be a theme that would be remembered in later times under a later Chinese government. One can get a sense of the spiraling down of American-Chinese relationship in the debates that took place in Congress of how to aid China. Would the United States come to Chiang Kai-shek's aid in the face of an apparent communist conquest of China? There were those, such as Senator Kenneth Wherry of Nebraska, who urged enormous aid to China, not only for Chiang Kai-shek, but for the rebuilding of post-war China, arguing for a Marshall-style plan for post-war China that would bring it peace and prosperity. Wherry said on the Senate floor that the United States should invest in China so that we could, for example, lift Shanghai, that great city, up, up, and ever up, until it was just like Kansas City. I don't know what people in Shanghai thought of that prospect at the time. But American support of the national government and of Chiang Kai-shek was waning. It was certainly not a positive sign in the relationship that Harry Truman, President Roosevelt's successor, would come to refer privately to Chiang Kai-shek not as the great general Chiang Kai-shek, but as cash my check.